Hello, my name's Rob and welcome to Swift Slots. In this video I'm going to be taking a close look, build and track test Pendle Slot's resin kit of the iconic VOLVO 850 British touring car. So many of us in the UK who follow the British touring cars will be very familiar with the VOLVO 850 estate car during the mid-90s as a touring car. It didn't do particularly well with regards results, but it was all about advertising and marketing for Volvo. So this car has been on my radar for a very long time, and I've always been a little bit worried about hitting the buy it now button because it's not the cheapest kit in the world, but with no other manufacturers making the estate version of this slot car, you're not left with a lot of choice. But my heart ruled my head in the end and I just had to go and buy one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get you down on the bench. I'm going to take you through all of the kit and show you the quality of the parts inside. Then we'll get to building it and then we'll get to track testing it. But I'm not going to hammer it round Crow Valley because I really don't want to damage the lovely body that's in this box or my paintwork. So it'll be a nurse around the track and see how we go, and I'll give you my feelings at the end of it. So let's crack on. Let's get you on the table and have a look at this kit. Okay, so let's get stuck into this box. One thing to note is how nicely this kit comes presented. Really nice, clean, uncomplicated, but more than good enough box. So this, as you can see, this comes as the touring car as per the tick, and it's the full kit. So here we are. Right, first thing to note is all the bubble wrap. It all comes nicely packed. There's nothing all floating around to get all damaged inside the kit. So we'll go through. Here is the interior tray. Very, very, very thin. Incredibly well defined vacuum form. Very clean and very, very sharp. I say very flexible and incredibly light. It's a very, very, very nice vacuum formed interior. I fitted a few of these in my time, and this one is by far the nicest and the sharpest one that I've come across. So that's really, really good. Inside the box here we've got the driver figure and the rear view mirrors, front grille and front indicators. So again, I've looked at the quality of this driver figure. Absolutely fantastic. I don't know how these masters were created, but they are done incredibly nicely. I don't think that they were 3D printed because I can see absolutely no evidence of any computer lay lines. So there's that. We got a this was 3D printed because it's 3D printed. So the 3D printed chassis, which according to the pictures on Pendle Slot seem to have changed a little bit over the years, but this is the latest version and it's got the really nice PSR logo on there, which I actually really like. It looks really nice. These are just spacers, so they don't stay on the kit, but it's an incredibly nicely made 3D print. Now, I'm not the greatest fan of 3D printing, but 3D printing in its place I'm actually happy with, and this one is very nice. It's got a really nice texture to it. It's quite heavily textured, but it's not textured in that horrible 3D printed way where you've got all the lines and everything else. It's got a sort of a coarse, almost sort of 100 grit sandpaper kind of feel to it, or maybe 120 grit sandpaper, but it's not sharp. It's just got a nice tactile feel to it, and it looks really great. VOLVO 850 all in there as well. It looks really nice. And this piece here is the part that mounts the back of the body, and it's been pre-fitted to save any confusion. I say these are just spacers around the outside. And then in the bag here there's one more spacer, which I believe, if I'm not greatly mistaken, is the spacer that goes on top of the front post so that you can make the road going version of this car where the body would sit slightly higher. But that's a very, very nice piece. So as you can see, it takes the slotted pod. Very, very nice indeed. And then we have a bag of goodies. That's a slotted, I think if my memory serves, that's a 28 tooth crown on a, oh I've forgotten, I think it's a 10 tooth. I'll correct it in the words if I'm wrong. I think it's a 10 on a 28 tooth, and that's a slotted gear. I don't know what brand the motor is. It'll be more than good enough, I'm sure. Obviously nylon gear. You've got some nice silicone wire in there. You've got a bit of braid. You've got a guide. Now this is the only part of the kit that I may deviate from, because my preference is the Slotting Plus guide, and I may make a small adjustment to my kit to put the slotting plus guide on. It's a little bit deeper for a routed wood track like I've got, so that might be my only deviation. You got the ferrules in there and some screws. Oh, you've also got what looks to be the NSR style shanked brass body screw. Having worked with the NSR screws recently on my Capri build, under my magnifying glass they look very much like the NSR ones, and they're very, very nice quality if they are. And there's two of those, I think. They're enough anyway. And next we have the wheels and tyres. Now these are very, very nice quality wheels and tyres, although I'm not entirely convinced that the spoke pattern is entirely right for the Volvo 850 as raced in the mid-90s. Not so much the pattern, the number of spokes, 10 spokes, that's right, but the size of the inner boss, or the inner part of the wheel, to me seems a little bit small. I think it could be a little bit bigger, but who cares, it's by the by. It's still a very, very nice wheel. Now this internal piece is definitely 3D printed. I can see the lines when I look under my magnifying glass, and you've got a representation of what will become the brake disc. Now the alloy wheels are very, very nice as well. I don't know who makes these. I suspect they're Pendle Slot alloy wheels, but the tyres are made by BRM and they feel very, very sticky. So I think we'll be okay with those, no problems at all. But they are very, very nice looking wheels and tyres. Get that brake disc back in there. And as you can see, the insert fits in extremely nicely. Really, really, really good. So there's those. We have a slotted pod, which I'm sure many of us are familiar with. Has the self-centering spherical bearings in the back there. It's an inline pod, obviously, of the black variety, which I believe is the hard one. Doesn't actually say on the packet. I think the black is the hard one, and it's 0 offset. And then we have the decals, which are, well, they're decals. They're very nice, to be fair. They're the type that you have to cut out very, very close. They're not the ones where you can just randomly cut them, dump them in water, and the actual decal comes away and only leaves the film around the image. You've actually got to cut the image out. So a little bit more work to put them on, but no less, they're just as good. I mean, to be honest with you, some of the ones that are even pre-cut out, I actually trim them down anyway. So that's neither here nor there. And then we have one of my great reliefs in this kit. Having studied the pictures before I bought it, the images show like a bathtub Lexan glass, and they, in fairness, don't always fit kits all that well, because you've got to take up the thickness of the body, and you always end up with like a windowsill, like a shelf effect, and that can be a bit of a pain really. But these are not like that. These are actually recessed, so that actually almost flush fit, if not flush fit, depending on the quality of the vacuum form or the quality of the master. These should, in theory, be fantastic. And certainly on the front windscreen, where the winds with modern cars, obviously the glass blends into the body, and obviously with the old way of doing the glass, where you've got to take up the thickness of the casting, that could be a bit of a problem. You lose that look. But this glass appears to be like it's going to sit in flush, so these are going to make some beautiful looking glass, and the back end looks much the same as well, with that lovely roll at the top into the roofline. I think these are going to be absolutely superb when they're in place. I can't wait to get this glass into the kit. And they're very, very clear as well. There's no marks on them, nothing. They're just fantastic looking glass. And then we get on to the body. I've left this till last because this body is absolutely gorgeous. So here's the roll cage. Now the roll cage isn't sold with the kit as standard. You have to ask Sean for it, because as I understand it, these are a little bit expensive to produce and they're just a pain. So Sean is on about selling these separately as an added extra. But if you don't want to go for the added extra cost, you can make up this roll cage purely by using 1.5mm white plastic card and just run a few bars in. That'll do the job perfectly well. But this is a beautiful casting. If you do get the option to buy this separately, I would buy it because it's just such a nice piece. Anyway, on to the body. This is fantastic. I've looked at this under my magnifying glass. I'm on a 20 times loop, and I cannot find any ley lines and I cannot find any imperfections. It's superb. This will be a quick rub over the top with some 1200 grit wet and dry, a couple of coats of primer, and crack on. Absolutely superb body. Really, really pleased with it. Now, one of the downsides to a resin kit can be the body weight. Because of the materials that they're made from, they can be a little bit on the weighty side. So we'll find out roughly what this body is going to weigh when finished. So there's the body. The body is 19.7 grams. And the two glasses in there, okay, it's got a bit of flash, but then the body's not painted, so that cancels out. Comes to 22 grams roughly. With the roll cage, it comes to 22.5. With the interior in a plastic bag, comes to 24.7, and then with the interior, which hasn't been trimmed, comes to 26.3 grams. So by the time you've taken away the plastic bag and you've trimmed the interior, you could call it 25.5 grams, I guess. Now, I don't know how that compares to other cars, and I know that some of the Scalextric bodies, to name but one company, can be, and Carrera, can be, you know, reasonably weighty. So I don't suppose that 26 grams or 25 grams is all that bad. And to be honest with you, who on earth is going to hammer a resin kit around a club track and knock the hell out of it? I don't think you will. I think this would be the sort of car that people would buy, paint, and just enjoy. So I don't think that the body being that heavy is that much of an issue. Plus also the car's very narrow and pretty long. So I'm not expecting this car to handle like an NSR Formula 1 car. It's just not that type of car. It's just done for the joy of it. So I don't think the weight is all that bad or a problem. Okay, so the first job is to clean all the parts of any release agent that may or may not be on it. And for that, I've got some isopropyl alcohol and a toothbrush. So I'll just scrub all these parts, place them on the tissue to dry, scuff them up with some Scotch-Brite paper, and then get some primer on them. Right, with all those parts scrubbed and cleaned, the next job is to get a piece of wooden stick and cover it in gaffer tape and then stick all the individual parts to it. And there we are, all the parts all lined up, stuck to the gaffer tape, all ready for spraying. This is only just to get the initial primer coat. This isn't going to be how we're going to be spraying the final parts. The final parts will be divided up into the different colours and sprayed accordingly. But this is how I'm going to set them up, just to get your basic primer coat on. The body also needs one extra mounting post in the back, because there's not a lot to grip onto with the one post. I'm going to put a tiny drop of super glue in the back and just mount a post onto there. And then put a little tiny bit of kicker on there. There you go. And that will just dry off, and I can grind that off when the whole paint job's done. There we go. That's actually glued. So then we can get our handy hand on there, and this then can be painted as well in the primer. Like that. There we are. So that now gives us something to hold to. And the roll cage, to be honest, I think I'll just grip that in my one of these. They stay shut tweezers, so I can grip that, I don't know, probably there will do the job perfectly well. And then there you are, like that. Right, let's get some primer on. The primer I should be using is the Mr. Colour 1500 Grey mixed 50-50 with the Mr. Colour levelling thinner. I'm going to give everything a nice couple of gentle coats, and then once the body is done, I should be rubbing all of the primer off just to get back to roughly what we're looking at here, just to ensure that any little imperfection is either filled or blended out or whatever. Whereas the smaller parts, they'll just have a couple of coats on, taken off the tree and then separated into their separate colours. Okay, so that's one coat of primer on everything. Now I did say that I was going to put 2 coats of primer on this body, but that was because I was anticipating some form of little tiny blemish that would need just filling up with a bit of primer or addressing somehow, but I found absolutely nothing. So I've just left it at one coat, and what I should do is I shall sand off all of this coat of paint back down to the resin, just to make sure that it's completely flat, and any sort of bumps or ripples that are on a microscopic level that would just show up as the gloss coat flashes across the body when it's varnished, that's not there. Because I find that each process, as you paint or cast or any sort of paint application, leaves a slight orange peel, and in my experience orange peel builds up on top of orange peel. It never gets better, it always seems to get worse with each coat. So I found the more that you can sand down between coats, the smoother the top gloss will end up being. However, if you start off with a slightly uneven surface, it just gets worse. So what I'll do is I'll sand this completely down with sort of 1500 grit wet and dry to give me the best possible flat surface I can possibly get. Then I will hit this with the white primers. But as you can see from the grey primer, it really does show up all of the body contours. This is why I was not too keen on showing this body in too much detail when I was doing the introduction. It's why I cut the video slightly short, because I was waffling on about stuff that would show up better when it's in grey. But I wanted to just show you how good this casting actually is. I'm really impressed with it. It's lovely. So that's the body sorted out. The roll cage, well, that's just a roll cage. So what I'll do now is I will give that a coat of white primer. Now I've used the grey to show up any imperfections, which there are none. So I'll go straight to white primer on the roll cage. The parts tree, that can now be broken up into its individual parts. So the wheels and inners will go into a grey. The brake discs, the back of the seat, the lights and the grille, they will go into Alclad. Now Alclad is this stuff. I did mention it on a previous video, and it's worth going to see Barbatos Rex's YouTube channel, and he tells you all about Alclad. This is amazing stuff. What you do is you put down 2 coats of this gloss black, and this is an enamel gloss black. I think it's ready to go from the gun. It's very thin. I'm sure it's straight out the gun. So 2 coats of that as a base coat. Then you use your actual Alclad, which is basically a lacquer with particles suspended in it. It's incredibly thin. You don't need much. You only need enough as to get the finish that you want. You don't need more. You don't build up your thickness with this. You just give the tone with that. And then over the top you use their clear. It's a water-based clear. Really weird. It's just, it says on the bottle, do not shake. It's very odd, but you use that, and that actually seals over the chrome effect and protects it. It's very good stuff. So what I'm going to do in that is back of the seats, the front end parts, and the brake disc parts. The helmet will stay in grey because that's got to go black, I believe, and some other colours, but mainly black. The rear view mirrors, or the door mirrors, they will be rubbed down and glued to the body once the body is ready for its build-up primer coats. The primer I'm going to use for the white will be this Mr. Colour Finishing Surfacer 1500, which is the slightly finer one. Again, I shall sand down between coats, but I'll put about 3 coats of this onto the body, sanding down after the second coat and putting the final coat on. That'll give me a nice uniform white, and I can just brush over the top of that just to make sure that it's as flat as it can be, and then I'll start with the body colours, but we'll work that out when we get there. Now the wheels, I've studied the wheels on the internet, and obviously pictures on the internet is no research at all really. However, every picture is different, and most of the time the wheels appear to be like a mid gunmetal grey. So to get that colour, which is this one here, I'm not really sure how well this is showing up on the camera. Light is different through the screen and through your own eyes and so on. But to my eye, in real life, this grey here is about right. And I got that grey by mixing 1 part of Mr. Colour 159, which is super silver apparently, and 1 part of 28, which is steel, or actually metallic steel to give it its full name. And the other silver is metallic super silver. So 1 part of this, 1 part of that gives me this one, this colour here. Now I did try and mix on the other side, and that was with a more metallic silver, and to be honest with you, that's a bit too metallic. In real life, that glistens a bit too much. No, that's for the blue, forget that. So yeah, so that's that. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to break up this parts tree, get all these parts into the right order, and get them all sprayed up into their individual colours. And then once I've done that, I'll get to sanding the body and start laying up the white primer. The roll cage will also go into white primer. So let's get on with that. So there we are. That's as much of the grey sanded off as I felt necessary. The reason I put grey on is because you can see grey better against the resin. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to stick on 2 coats of white primer, flat that back, and then put one last coat of white over the top just to fill in any thin spots that may happen on that sanding, and then that's the priming finished. And we've got the roll cage ready to go here. So my plan was to give this a rubbing down and then a 3rd coat of primer, but the paint was pretty good, so instead of giving it 1500 grit wet and dry, I went straight to 3200 and gave it a go with that. And I haven't gone through any of the primer, and the colour is still nice and solid and white. So as far as I'm concerned, that's enough primer on there and we can move straight to top coats. However, this helmet does need to go to white because I got it slightly wrong. It's not a black helmet, it's dark blue and some other colours. So that'll need a quick coat of white primer just to get that going. And then I shall move on to painting the inners of these alloy wheels matte black, and I shall pop them in the lathe and just do them manually, and that'll be those wheels done. And then the centres of these have got to have a little black dot with some black panel liner right in the middle, and that's those completely finished. Okay, to now use a secret weapon, Tamiyar's panel liner. This won't be the last time you see this product being used on this build. So there you are. That's the backs of the wheels painted in matte black, and the centre nuts in gloss black with a little bit of shadowing behind the centre nut of the wheel face. And if you're wondering what that Alclad's looking like before we put the lacquer onto the top of it, it's looking like this. Pretty shiny. So here we have the whole kit and its first stage painting done. But the first thing I want to do is make a small change to the kit, and that's the front guide. So the standard fitment of the guide fits like that, with about 1 millimetre lower in the tube, so there's no room to adjust. The standard Slotting Plus guide fits in and is almost exactly the same fit. If I'm honest, it's a little bit better, to be fair, but the big advantage is you've got about 4 millimetres of plain shaft there, so you can have an awful lot of drop guide, which is really, really helpful. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to improve the fitment of the Slotting Plus guide by putting a little bit of super glue, thin super glue, you could use thick as well, onto a cocktail stick and go around the inside of the hole, let that dry and put a bit more on, go around the hole and keep coming back to it until my Slotting Plus guide doesn't quite fit. Once it doesn't fit, I've got a broach here, or you can use a 3.6mm drill, and I'm going to broach out the hole so that the Slotting Plus guide fits really, really nicely. This is the Slotting Plus guide I'm using. It's the standard 7mm deep Slotting Plus guide. And there we are. That was actually incredibly easy to do. So what we've got now is almost no play in that guide at all. That's a marked improvement. We've got a lovely free to drop guide that's completely free, and also doing the old bristle test with the loose bristles, as you can see, absolutely free as anything. So the next job now, I think, to be honest, is we'll get the back pod all sorted out. Right, and there we are. So that's the pod all fitted. There's no movement in it at all, but the screws are only just nipped up. They're not cranked tight, they're just there. So you're not stressing anything, but there's no movement. So that will give you a much truer representation of where the axle is sitting in regards to the chassis. So that's that done. Now we can turn our attentions to building up the wheels. So I've pre-painted these as I've already shown you in the video. And it's just a simple case of assembling it together with a tiny spot of super glue on the inside of the wheel, and as you drop the disc in, it'll just bond it in. These brake discs, they center on that nub in the middle, so you don't need to glue these in, they can be in there loose. And as you can see, I've painted the back of the wheel, but I haven't painted the sides, but I don't actually think that you'll see any of my nice grey paint on the inside of the wheel, but hey ho. Right, so let's get these wheels and tyres assembled up then. So let's get the back wheels on. And then the front axle on. And there we are. Now you'll notice that they've got grub screws over the mounts, and for that you will need a 1.3mm Allen key, and you can adjust the height of the axle. Close enough. Right, now we can pop the guide in and see what we're dealing with. And there is a small amount of movement there, which will be just about enough thickness for the braids. So we'll pop the braids in and see where we're at from there. Now, there we are. So there's the front wheels are now moving, but there's almost nothing touching that setup plate. There is resistance there, but it's not very much, and they do roll nicely. And now I've still got my nice and even ground clearance, so that's perfect. That's done. So what I can do now is pop the screw in the top of the Slotting Plus guide and move on to fitting it to the body. Okay, so this is the tricky part of the build. Basically, if you build the road going version of this car, You can use the chassis as it is because the bottom of the chassis comes level with the bottom of the body and it's all good. If you want to do the racing car version of this car, the chassis has to sink up inside the body like this. Now, I've already been working on this body, so there's a little bit of work done, so you have to forgive me for that. But that's how I know this is the situation. So there you are. That now fits lovely. That's not tight against the body, but it's not loose either. It's just a nice fit. So you'll notice that with these side panels bolted on as the kit is supplied, there's a big gap. You can see there, look, how much of a gap there is now between the side panel and the chassis. And that is where it would normally screw. Look, you can see the hole in there and you can see the gap. So by adding these side pieces on makes this chassis about 2mm or 3mm overall too wide for this body, and it swells the body out far too much. So I can't use these pieces. But in the kit they supply you with this rear mount. There's a low side and a high side. Flip it over the high side to lift the body off for the road going version. Turn it around the other way for the low fitment for the racing version. So I've got it turned to the lowest setting for the racing version, and I suspect I'll have to lower it a little bit more again. So that's fine. So that will go in there and it will go up against the body stop. There's body stops inside here, both sides. So that mount will go in and it will sit against the body stops, and there you are. Now the racing version, the top of the wheel is supposed to sink just below the rear arch. So we need to go a little bit more to just to sink it a little bit lower. So that's why I may need to take off these wings a little bit more. Now that's fine, but the front end is got a slight problem as well, in as much as that body hole there does not line up with that body hole there in the chassis when the wheels are perfectly centered in the arch. And I can show you that with this pin. If I put a pin into that hole there, if I put it through the chassis and then into that hole just there like that, lower the whole thing down and then center the wheel in the arch, you can see how much that pin is now being forced to point forwards, which is showing you that the holes do not line up. If I bring the wheel back, you can see the pin straightens up and then the wheel is in the wrong place in the arch. So as I bring it forwards, the wheel is in the right place in the arch and the pin is moving forwards. So that hole is not in the right place. So what I need to do is fill up the hole and move it forwards. Alternatively, what I can do is I can chop this body mount down and glue a new piece of resin on top. If you don't have any resin to hand, then you could cut that back and put a bit of plastic card, glue a piece of 2mm plastic card on there and redo the hole, filling this hole up first, and that will solve the problem. So what I'm going to do off camera, because it's very tricky to film all this body fitment because it's back and forth, I'm going to glue this piece of 1.5mm piano wire to the underside of this rear mount across there to strengthen this resin mount, because I won't be able to use these original side pieces, so I need to get some strength, and this over time it could sag down and allow the body to sag, and then fettle the fitment so the chassis ends up fitting very, very neatly into the body and gives me the correct ride height. And there we are, that's the chassis all finished. There are 2 notches in this chassis to pass the wire through, and then I've drilled the extra 2 over here so the wire doesn't get bound up in the front axle. It also helps to self-center the front guide as well. So what I've done to the inside of the body is I've glued in my extra piece of resin here, and I've put my reinforcing bar across the back, little tiny packer, it's only 10 thou, and that's really stiffened at the back end. And then I'll put the body on and you can see how it sits right height wise. There we are. The correct stance for the touring car, where the wheels are just tucked up underneath the arch. Okay, so with that now done, it's time to get painting the body. So now we get to painting the blue stripes. Now colour is extremely subjective, and Pendle Slot did give me the RAL colours for them, but because I'm using the Mr. Colour paints, I couldn't really use those RAL numbers. So I've got number 5 blue and 110 character blue, and that's these two colours here. The character blue in my eye is a little bit grey. Number 5 seems perfect at the pot with a slight purple hue, which is what the car seems to have. I then started mixing white with those two blues, and I wasn't getting what I wanted. So I bought Mr. Colour 34, which is sky blue, and Mr. Colour 323, which is light blue. And that's the 323, and that's the 34. 34 is a bit dark, 323 is a bit light. So then I mixed them 50-50, which got me really close, but it's still a little bit dark. So then I added in 1 drop of white. So that's 2 drops of 323, and 2 drops of 324, and 1 drop of white. And that got me to this colour here, which is a lot closer, but still a little bit dark. And then I ended up doing a mix of 2 drips of 323, 2 drips of 34, and 2 drips of white, which got me to this colour here, which I think is spot on. And to see the difference in the slightly lighter hue, there's a strip down this part of the plastic card here, which is the lighter colour, and this is the darker. So there's a little strip there and a lighter there. So the mix ratio in the end turned out to be 1 part 323, 1 part 34, and 1 part white. And the white is just a straight up Mr. Colour number 1 white. So that's what I'm going with. The straight up blue and a mix of 1 part of each, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 to get me the light blue. So, With the single coat of gloss coat over the top of my basic colours, that pretty much concludes the painting of this body with regard to the different colours that I'm going to lay down. Now what I do before I lay the gloss coat down is I sand off all the little mask lines all over the body, because the masking tape will actually leave a bit of a ruck in the paintwork. So that needs to come off so that the body is reasonably smooth to the touch, because if you're laying a decal over a paint transition colour and the ruck is there, the decal will lump and rise over the top of it and it looks unsightly as the light flashes over the body. So what I do before I put the gloss coat on, but all the main colours are laid down, I sand off all the masking lines with a bit of this 3200 grit micro mesh, very, very gently, just very gently go over each masking line and just take off the little burr or the little ruck in the paint that it's left by the masking tape. Once that's all done, obviously the body or the colours become a bit matte down, a bit flat, and you need a gloss coat to put your water slides on. So obviously that's not going to work, which is why I then put on the gloss top coat, just the one good coat that's got 100% thinners as an after coat to get that shine back after flatting down all of the mask lines. So what happens if this is your painted surface to be painted here, you'll put your masking tape on here and the paint will run across the bottom of your painted surface. It'll run up this masking line and to a degree over the edge there. And when you peel away the masking tape, which is why you're supposed to peel away wet, you break that joint there. So you end up with a paint line that looks something like that. And then what I do, I never put two colours under each other. Obviously the baseline white, but the blue is not that blue isn't under that blue, and that blue isn't under that blue. I mask off everything as their own individual colour. So I end up with a ruck of one colour there, and when I mask up to it, I then end up with a duplicate like that. So and then when you put the gloss coat over the top, if you didn't flat that down, the gloss coat would end up doing that. And so would the decal. So when the light flashes across it, it'll look awful. So if you sand down the masking tape line to sand that off there flat, and then you put your lacquer top coat over the top, then you've got a nice flat surface to put your decal and then all the other subsequent lacquer coats on top. So that is why there's only one coat of lacquer on it now, even though the base coat was glossy, because I've sanded down all these mask lines with a bit of 320 fine. Now it's lovely and smooth. You can't feel any of the mask lines, and now I'm ready to put the decals on. So the decals, that be these. So off we go. Let's get some decals on now. And that completes all the water slides on the body itself. Just the water slides left to go now on the glass, and then it can all be sealed up and locked in with some lacquer. I must say, these water slides are absolutely fantastic. I was extremely worried about these 14s on the side of the door. Because of all these body contours, there's a very deep groove that runs just on the top of this rubbing strip, and I was very worried about having the door number following those contours. I did actually have my Microsol softener here, you might have seen it. Didn't need it. They all just fall into place. The only downside that I would say is a very minor downside is this white could be just a little bit stronger, but you know, that's fine. The rest, apart from that, they're absolutely superb. They really do come off their backing very, very quickly though, so really you want to work with one decal at a time, because if you blink, they're coming off their backing and you've got to get them on the model fairly quickly. But that's actually quite a good thing, because it means you can work through them quite quick. I have had decals that take, you know, a couple of minutes to come off their backing, and then it's a bit more of a juggling act between how many you've got soaking and how many you're putting on. And if you have one that's being a little bit difficult, then, you know, you've got a bit of a problem then, because other ones are starting to come off. But these ones are really good. They come off really quick, so you can almost do these decals one at a time. So there we are. And there's the headlight decals, which are a little bit tricky to get on because it's all ribbed, but they go on fine. So let's get this glass in and the decals applied to the glass, and then I can give this body about 8 hours in the dehydrator, and then we can lacquer up the body. And there we are, that's more or less the interior finished. The front half of the dashboard is very dark grey and the back half is a lighter grey. I don't know if that's right, but it just gives it a bit of interest. I painted the tops of these high spots on the passenger side with a bit of silver. Again, I don't know if it's right, but it just gives it a little bit of interest through the window. I've had a go at putting some insignia on his arms and had a go at putting Volvo and some other bits and bobs on his front, and done my best to give a representation of Jan Lammers' helmet in the more or less the correct colours with more or less the correct lines. Given it a little bit of grey in the visor just to break up the black, just gives it a bit more interest, I think. And when we put the roll cage on, it pulls it all together quite nicely, I think. And there it is, with the roll cage all in. It's a pity you won't be seeing a lot of this detail through the window, but we can only try. And there we are, there's a quick revision of the interior with the addition of a seat belt and a little bit of extra colour over here. The seat belt's simply made from a bit of scrap sign writing vinyl. And while I had the vinyl out, I traced the side window through off the car itself and made this window mesh as well, which is the correct size and colour. And I put a little bit of super glue on the back just to bond it all to make sure it doesn't come apart over time. And that will be stuck to the inside of the window once the windows are fixed in. The windows will be fixed in using this silver foil tape of the type that you can get for doing the insulation on your house. I find the aluminium conforms to any shape and stays completely put. Because it's metal, it stays there, doesn't come unstuck over time, and the sticky is incredibly sticky and just does a very good job. It doesn't weigh anything either. And I've also finally taken away the support post that I glued in there because we don't need it anymore. And I will also be making a windscreen wiper out of this very fine piece of scrap brass wire that I've got. Right, so let's get all this glass in and assemble up the body. So that's the glass all in place using the foil tape. And I think you'll agree it makes quite a neat job of getting the glass in. And being aluminium, it really does lock everything into place. So let's get the interior in. Right, that's the interior all in. Looking okay. Again with the silver foil. Right, let's get on with finishing off all the last little details then. For those that don't know what I've just been using to highlight all the panel lines, it's the Tamiya panel liner. This one's the black version. It's basically just a very, very thin black paint, but it's got a very strong capillary action and it runs down all the little gaps really, really well. So you'll notice that when you first put it on, you have to keep daubing it as you go and you get these little marks and sometimes a smudge. But the way to get those off, once it's fully dry, is you get some paint renovator or some T-cut, whatever they call it. And you put a splodge on there and pick up just a small amount on a cotton earbud, hardly anything. You don't want anything at all really. And you just gently wipe the panel liner away and the marks will come out like this. There we are. See, that is completely gone now. And then what you can do is get a nice clean soft cloth and then just wipe off the excess. And there you are, no more marks. And just repeat the process all over the car. Very important not to put too much T-cut or whatever fluid you've used to buff it off with. Don't put too much on the Q-tip, otherwise it'll end up causing some problems which you don't want. So let's get on with the rest of the body and move on to the next step. And there you go, all finished. I've got to say, this kit is absolutely fantastic. There's nothing on it that I dislike. Everything fits together like it should do. There's no flash, there's no sprue, there's no fuzzy bits that you have to kind of fudge together and get to fit. The decals look fantastic and fit beautifully. Everything just works on it. It's a lovely, lovely kit. So I did say that I wasn't going to thrash this car around Crow Valley and try and push for a fast time. But after putting it on the track, it actually felt really, really solid. So I did push it a little bit. So I guess you're wondering what time it did. Well, as I've said many times, 55 seconds is quick. 50 seconds is really quite respectable. And anything beyond 50 seconds is really flying. So with my aspirations a little bit low, but wanting to push a little bit, how did I do? I did this. So there you are. I'm really happy with that. That's right on the money. There is more speed in it. I don't want to find it. I don't want to damage the car. If I trued the tyres and pushed a bit harder, maybe risked a few chips and scrapes, I could have got it to go faster. And there is more in the car, but I just don't want to. In terms of size, it's very similar to the Pioneer Mustang or the Scalextric Mustang in terms of wheelbase and width. Very, very similar indeed. And the weight is about the same. This car's weighing in at 80 grams with 9 grams of lead in it. So that's pretty good. And it's actually coming in about 5 grams lighter than my Pioneer Mustang that I've lightly tuned. But it does go better than that. There's no upset in this body when it's going around the corners. It's very planted. Within, you know, for what it is, it's very, very planted. It's not like an NSR, but you wouldn't expect it to be. But I was very, very surprised at how good it actually goes. It's pretty sure-footed. So if I'd have trued the tyres, it would have been even better. It would have been really, really good. It doesn't show any tendencies to want to fall over particularly. It will fall over if you push it hard. But, you know, I don't want to push it hard. So there we are. It's an absolutely fantastic kit and I'm over the moon that I bought it. If you were on the fence about buying one, if you've been eyeing one up and you weren't quite sure for whatever reason, just go and buy one. They're fantastic. It's such a beautiful kit. Yes, I've added a few extra bits on mine, the wiper, the aerial, the window mesh, the seat belts. I've even made a pretty box for it. But you don't need any of those things for it to be a really nice kit in and of itself. It's a fantastic car. It goes really well on the track and I'm very, very pleased with it. I've spent most of the afternoon just ogling it as I've put it on my mantelpiece finished in its box. It's just fantastic. It's such an iconic car and it looks so awesome in this paint job. I'm really pleased with it. So that brings me to the end of another Swift Slots build. And if you've enjoyed this content, maybe you'll subscribe. And if you hit the little bell button, that'll be awesome. So until the next time, thank you very much.